All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Cami Sacco, and I'm with Second Nature. And today we're going to be talking about engaging community in your climate action planning. And I'm just going to go through a couple logistics before we hand it over to our panelists. So per usual of a webinar, it's being recorded. After the session, we'll send a link out to folks that have registered, and it will also be up on our YouTube. If you're feeling friendly today, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat with your name and institution so we can get an idea of who's here. We'll also have a poll here in just a minute to get a little bit more direct information on kind of where you live within your institution, or if you're coming from a city or a campus, and whether you've engaged with community in the past in your climate action planning. We have gathered some questions in the registration, but if you have additional ones throughout the webinar, please go ahead and put those either in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring those throughout the webinar, and we should have about 15 minutes after the overall content of Reena and Olivia to be able to answer those questions. Some of you have joined us for some of our other webinars in this webinar series. This is our second to last one. It began in August of 2024 around how to complete a climate action plan. So if you're interested in any of those are up on our YouTube channel. And this one, like I said, will also be up there once we complete this, hopefully by next week. And there's one more that is happening next Wednesday, and it's about updating your climate action plan. So if you're interested in that, you can head over to our LinkedIn is probably the best way to see it, or I can also put that information or that registration in the chat as well. We also have our Higher Education Climate Leadership coming up in just 2 weeks in DC. And for those of you that are joining us, we're excited to have you, and we're hoping for warmer weather, a little bit warmer weather. I'm currently in Savannah, Georgia, where it is 35 degrees and snowy. So we might be getting a little luckier up north. And for those that have not registered yet, you still can for, I think, about another week. And you can just go to the website, higheredclimatesummit.org, to learn more information about the summit overall. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and launch this poll. And this is really something that Olivia and Reena had thought about, questions that they would like to know from you all, and kind of where you sit within your role and what you have, what work you have done within your community, or with your community or within your community. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that, and we'll keep it open just for a couple minutes. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll, and then I'll read our results just so folks know who else you're here with. So in terms of where people are coming from within the institution, we have quite a bit of folks that are in the sustainability office from the facilities side or within operations, and a couple from both academic affairs and student affairs, and then a couple that are from upper administration. And then we have about 5 folks who are in the other category, which I'm super curious of who y'all are. So you're welcome to put that in the chat and maybe why you're here. And we have from type of institution, quite a few from large public institutions, also quite a few from private institutions, and then a couple from small publics, minority serving institutions, and community colleges. And so if you have written a climate action plan, we asked how far along you are. So quite a few are just beginning, which is that's good to know, I think, for Reena and Olivia, just so they can speak to that a little bit more on how to maybe engage with your community throughout that process. And then quite a few also that put other there. So curious about that as well. And then the next one is how engaged is your community in your climate action planning process? And we have a pretty good mid-level of they're kind of engaged, but not all the way engaged. And then the last question, does your campus or community already have a climate action plan? About 40% of you said both. 30% said yes to campus only, about 20% said community only, and then a couple or a few said no to both. So this is really helpful information just for Olivia and Reena, just to know again who's in the room. So, and the other thing I wanted to say before I introduce Olivia and Reena, if folks have other examples or ways that they have worked with their community that Olivia and Reena maybe aren't speaking to or you've just had your own experiences, please feel free to put those in the chat. We're here to learn from everyone. And so we'd love to see those examples as well. So I'm going to introduce Reena and Olivia. Reena and Olivia are going to take it from here. So I'll introduce Olivia first. So Olivia Herron is the Director of Sustainability at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. She's passionate about creating environmental conscious campus communities where students can develop lifelong stewardship skills. She's also a Miami alumna and holds a Master of Environmental Science and a BA of Strategic Communications. And Reena Murphy is the sustainability coordinator for the city of Oxford and is responsible for climate action planning and implementation. She's passionate about equitable community engagement and finding practical solutions for government operations, residents, and businesses. Reena is also an alumni of Miami University and holds a master's of environmental science and a Bachelor of Arts in chemistry. So Olivia, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thanks for being
Thank you so much, Cami. If you could advance to the next slide for us. Oh, sorry, one more slide, actually. Thank you. So I'm going to begin by just giving you some context of Miami University for those who aren't familiar. We're a campus of about 20,000 students, about 17,000 of those being undergrads and the rest being graduate students. We're a primarily residential and very rural campus. So we're fortunate to be situated on 2,000 acres of land here in Southwest Ohio, but we consider our primary campus core to be about 300 acres. We've actually designated 1,000 acres as natural land in perpetuity, which is a great partnership with our community. We maintain 17 miles of hiking trails for the community to utilize. And I mentioned as a primarily residential student or campus, our first and second year students have a live-on requirement. So 8,500 people go to bed, at Miami every night. And that's important context when you think about energy or water consumption. 8,500 showers every day are happening on our campus, for instance. And the majority of our students, when they no longer have that live-on requirement, live in what we refer to as the Mile Square, which is a very small district of downtown Oxford, where there are both a mix of large houses, so 10 girls sharing a house together on our high street, and then quite a few large apartment complexes that serve the rest of our upperclassmen. But I am also then going to turn it over to Reena to situate the university within our larger community.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. So, Miami University students do make up the majority of Oxford's population. We have about 23,000 people. Our napkin math on how many of them are students are about 17,000. This is important because that means our community looks very different when school is in session versus not, especially due to the live-on requirements. So summer around here is pretty quiet, and the month of January around here is pretty quiet. For additional context, Miami is the largest employer in Butler County, where Miami and Oxford are. And Miami is the largest source of our community's emissions. We don't have a lot of industrial type activity in our community, so the university kind of takes the cake on that one. And then lastly, we are a very close-knit community because of our size. There's a lot of very natural town-gown crossover. A tidbit that I think summarizes this really well is that 6 out of 7 of our city council members are either retired from, work for, or are married to a Miami employee. And this isn't just leadership. These are our librarians. These are our faculty members across different departments. These are PhD candidates. So we want to acknowledge that collaboration is pretty integral to our community's climate action planning.
Perfect. Next slide. We also wanted to review our individual climate action plans and how those complement each other, differ for each other, and the timelines. So Miami and the city of Oxford both began discussions of pursuing carbon neutrality around the same time, just before, although we didn't know it at the time, the COVID pandemic, which we have so much that we won't get into about the experiences of trying to write a climate action plan during the pandemic. But Miami is a PCLC climate commitment signatory through Second Nature. We signed in 2020, and we have a goal to be carbon neutral by 2040. We follow the scopes as prescribed by Second Nature, which is important when you think about especially Scope 3 emissions. So at this point, we are only aiming for carbon neutrality as it pertains to faculty, staff, student commuting, and university financed air travel, which emphasizes the importance of Scope 3 reductions in partnership with the community. Scope 3 is always tricky for, I think, every entity and especially universities, but we rely very heavily on partnership with the community for addressing our Scope 3 emissions. Folks cannot commute to Oxford without the partnership of some of our regional agencies, like our County Transit Authority, which we'll get into later in the presentation. But Reena, if you'd like to talk about GCOM.
Yeah, so the city of Oxford is a signatory of the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is like loosely our version of Second Nature. It provides us with emissions reporting platforms. It provides us with great structures for inspiring climate action in our community. We joined GCOM in 2019 and then took a year or two to create our emissions reduction targets. So you'll see we have a 50% reduction by 2030 using that 2019 baseline, and then our goal is for community-wide net neutrality by 2045. I would like to point out that Miami is going to beat us for carbon neutrality, but we beat them on having a climate action plan. Friendly competition is definitely a part of the collaboration of our communities. And then you'll note here that we excluded our Miami's emissions from our goals, not because Miami's not doing a great job. It's because they have their own climate commitments. Realistically, there's very little that the city can do to legislate Miami to reduce their emissions, but of course we are collaborating. So we decided to focus on more of the off-campus activities that we have more influence under. Although Miami's doing a great job, I wish I could claim credit for Olivia's success. So next slide, please.
So comparing our two plans, we also have them linked for you all after the presentation. If you'd like to access those, we wanted to make sure that they were available. But we also wanted to emphasize some of the differences that I think are very obvious just looking at what we chose to name our plans. So Miami's plan is very much focused on carbon neutrality rather than including climate resiliency. We did do a resilience assessment as part of our climate commitment. That's part of the requirements with the commitment that we signed with Second Nature. And that assessment was completely conducted by professional service project students in the Masters of Environmental Science program. We'll talk more about other projects later in the presentation, but the findings of our resilience assessment was that most areas were actually best handled by the city or by the county. For instance, Reena and I always joke that we learned that Miami has no influence over the number of hospital beds available in the local hospital in case of heat stroke. Heat stroke was a major concern or heat-related incidents when our master's students conducted that resilience assessment. So it is an area where we try to play to each of our strengths. Miami is very capable of reducing our on-site emissions, but partnerships are necessitated for improving the resiliency of our community.
Yeah, I don't have much to add other than we included resilience because that is within our scope of influence, and oftentimes for cities, things that support mitigation also support resilience, especially when we're dealing with our built environment.
Next slide. So we also wanted to discuss the similarities and differences between our committees and sustainability boards. They have quite a bit of overlapping membership, or they did during the planning process very intentionally. Another big lesson learned actually independently, but it was really fortunate that Reena and I had each other to navigate the experience of going from the planning process to the implementation process. And since those were key highlights to us, we wanted to make sure that we explained that to all of you in attendance today. If we could go to the next slide. I will explain some of Miami's governance structures and our experiences there. So Miami is very fortunate to have had a standing sustainability committee since 2010. That was at first a completely volunteer group of faculty and staff who were just personally passionate about environmentalism and sustainability. It took about 5 years for that group to garner enough attention and momentum to fund our first part-time sustainability coordinator, which was a course release for a faculty member. The person was in that role for several years before we were able to get a joint appointment with our energy and utilities office. So we had a half sustainability coordinator, half energy conservation specialist. That evolved into a full-time sustainability position, which was held by my predecessor. And so I am Miami's second full-time director of sustainability. And I'm very excited to share that my office has now grown to 2 full-time staff as of 2 weeks ago. It's one of the first goals in our climate action plan that we've been able to achieve since we ratified it in May of last year. So we're very excited to have a staff of 2 at this point. And I wanted to make sure I highlighted that because despite being a fairly large campus with very ambitious climate goals, we are certainly constrained by staff time. That's something that Reena will also be able to speak to for her role. And one of the greatest ways that we've been able to really punch above our weight, I would say, is by utilizing student projects at the master's and the undergraduate level to encourage the university to both see the value of and to have data to justify these types of projects and the climate action plan in general. But our climate action task force was founded in 2020 when we signed the commitment, and we did intentionally write it in the charter that that group would dissolve when the plan was ratified. So the picture in the bottom right is the members who were able to make it to our Board of Trustees meeting last May, where we finalized our climate action plan, and that group then dissolved to form an implementation group, which we did outline in the implementation section of our plan. I also highly recommend that you do not walk away from the planning process. Implementation is a key element of finishing your climate action plan. And the structure that we determined was necessary was to have a climate action and sustainability executive steering committee. If anyone's interested in more details, all of the members of these groups are on our website. I didn't want to bore you with too many details, but we're happy to answer questions. But those groups, the executive steering committee is made up of our provost and highest level vice presidents of all areas of the university. They meet quarterly to receive updates from the 6 working groups that I have listed. We also found that it was much more successful to have working groups with very explicit focuses, and we actually wrote first year goals for each group as they were being established. The accountability of having first year goals already laid out, and we actually worked for each of the co-chairs of these groups. It's typically a staff member from physical facilities and then a volunteer faculty member. There are a couple of exceptions. Like for instance, the energy working group, it just made sense for the director of utilities to be the one running that. But ensuring that it was actually in everyone's annual evaluation that we were achieving these goals has established a level of accountability that we've never had, and also has given some teeth to our commitment, and has the right people in the room when we encounter an obstacle, for instance, with a new procurement policy. The vice president of procurement is at all of those quarterly updates, and so the right people are getting the information in order to help us achieve our sustainability goals. Next slide.
I wanted to jump in one point on Miami's structure. Their original climate action planning committee, the city of Oxford did have a seat on it ex officio. So that was started before I was hired. So it was our assistant city manager. When I was hired, I stepped into the role as the city rep. As your campuses are planning are building your planning committees, I recognize it's weird or it's uncommon for a city Oxford size to have a sustainability coordinator. So be creative about who that representative could be, whether it's in the city manager's office, maybe it's someone in utilities or service department, maybe it's an urban planner with your community. But having seats at each other's planning table was really, really great and helpful outside of the natural crossover in our community. So sorry, just wanted to tag that in there. So as for Oxford's environmental boards, we have an environmental commission, and these are all citizen led. I'm the staff liaison to both of them, but I don't have a vote. The environmental commission was established in the 90s, and it is our primary board for sustainability implementation. In 2020, we had the climate action steering committee established. This was before my position even existed, and it was a group of volunteers who said, we are serious about climate action. We have time and expertise to give to the city. We hear the staffing concerns, put us to work. So it was a really, really wonderful, it is a really wonderful group of volunteers. They are the primary board for our climate action plan creation. I was hired right as this was taking off. So then together we figured it out. And then this board also includes a Miami representative, an ex officio member, which Olivia serves on. Next slide, please. So one of our lessons learned, you heard Olivia say it, is that having 2 boards, one for the climate action plan and the other for implementation, is really great. We still have our climate action steering committee. We did have a bit of growing pains finding a role once the plan was adopted outside of reconvening to do an update. But we figured it out, and we do collaborative goal setting workshops between the 2 commissions. Another lesson we learned is to not let perfect be the enemy of good. We all want to have the perfect data before making a decision, but sometimes we know what we need to do regardless of if we have the perfect data. So don't go down rabbit holes, stay focused, to what's essential to having a good plan. And then the third one I should actually put on here is that if you have two boards, think about the acronym. Miami and the City of Oxford had the same acronym for our climate action steering committees, different long names, but the short name was the same, and there were like 5 members on both of them. Quite confusing. Check your acronyms before you establish them. Next slide, please.
So student projects have been a huge community resource to the City of Oxford. I should have also said that they have been a huge resource to my office as well. Reena and I wanted to highlight some of those for you all. We're going to try to keep it high level so that we leave as much time as possible for questions. So please know that as we go through these projects, if you have any questions about them specifically, we're happy to answer those. If we could go to the next slide. So these are 2 of the biggest collaborations to date in terms of climate action for both the City of Oxford and for Miami University. On the left is the Butler County Regional Transit Authority's multimodal hub. You may say, you just told me that you're a town of 6,000 when class isn't in session. How could you have, a depot like that to serve your community? And truly, it is a testament to the type of collaboration that Reena and I have been able to achieve with our county regional transit authority. Miami University actually funds the buses that run within Oxford. We found that it was more cost effective for us to support the county adding routes into our community, as opposed to, I know some universities operate their own transit system just to serve their students. And it also just has created continuity throughout the community. So if someone wanted to go to a neighboring town, they're staying in the same system, they can ride the bus to Hamilton, for instance. So that has been a huge asset to our community. Before COVID, it was technically only free to faculty, staff, and students. And we were having people tap their student ID as they were getting on the buses. And like many transit systems post-COVID, we just found that, in fact, that's not necessary. So they now are just free to anyone in the Oxford community to use. And Reena will speak more in a second to the partnership that is coming with Amtrak associated with that. She's more of an expert than I, but I just wanted to mention briefly before turning it over that we're really fortunate as well to have the Oxford Area Trail System, and Miami University has provided easements or just permission where necessary for those trails to circuit on our property. So if you look in the right, section 3 and section 2 of our Oats trail system cut through Miami University's properties, but I will leave the rest to Reena to describe.
Yeah, so this is where I get to brag about my coworkers because I didn't do any of this work, but they did, and it's awesome. The main way that the City of Oxford has contributed to these projects have also been in collaborative grant applications, especially with our regional metropolitan planning organization. So with the multimodal hub, our hope for an Amtrak stop extending from this multimodal hub, and then also with our Oxford area trails, we've received a lot of grant dollars. Awarded through my colleagues' work to make sure that we have good, low carbon, accessible public transit in our community. Cool. Next slide, please. Sweet. This program is a new program this year. I'm very excited to share. We are working with Miami's Institute for the Environment and Sustainability, or IES for short, to host 2 Campus Climate Action Corps members. This is a program that's in 2nd year of existence. It's AmeriCorps and Campus Compact, where the AmeriCorps members must spend half of their time in service to the community. So we are the wonderful beneficiary of their time. And these members are focusing explicitly on ecological restoration. Right now, this looks a lot like honeysuckle hacks, organizing those, and creating a native planting plan in a sanctuary in Oxford. Energy efficiency, our students will be providing energy efficiency home audits and low-tech weatherization assistance to homes in Oxford. And then also education and outreach. This is obviously a pretty broad category. We're focusing on naturalization, we're focusing on energy efficiency, waste management, things like that. And this whole program is funded by the university, and it is really incredible. It's starting to take flight now that we have a few months under our belt, and I really wanted to highlight it as an excellent town-gown collaboration opportunity for you guys. Next slide, please.
Wonderful. And this is sort of our catch-all slide for some of the remaining partnerships that we wanted to make sure that we highlighted. The professional service project is a key element of completing a Master's of Environmental Science at Miami. It's about a semester plus project for a team of 4 to 6 graduate students to get professional experience serving a group like our Climate Action Task Force. So 5 students conducted the resilience assessment as part of our commitment through Second Nature. But I was actually on the professional service project team that helped conduct the City of Oxford's first municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And I also wanted to highlight that because it evolved over time in a really unique way. So we conducted the first greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That was when there was no staff person in Oxford who could do that work. Once Reena was hired, we found that it was ultimately much easier for a staff person to be doing that rather than with the, this being a 1 semester project. It was really difficult for students to cultivate the type of relationships that are needed for data collection. Calling up the service department at the city as a graduate student and being like, how much gas did you use last year? Can be a little bit intimidating, albeit a very good professional development opportunity. And now having a full-time person in Reena's role, that project sort of evolved. We thought that graduate students were going to always be doing it. We have found other good uses for their talents. But it was enough to justify to the city that we were capable of developing a climate action plan, that having a full-time staff member would be justified, and there was plenty of work for them to be doing. I don't think, honestly, Miami as an institution or Oxford as a community would be where we are today if it weren't for the types of services that our graduate students provide to both of us to advance our climate work. Reena, would you like to talk a little bit more about some of these other projects that have benefited the city?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the foundation that the university really provided a strong base for my position to be created and to help our community see what is possible. Our professional service projects are longer ones, they're graduate student level, but they continue to assist us in our goals. We had a group last year focus on recycling at multifamily housing. I took their project, I applied for a grant, we received the grant, and now we're implementing their top 2 recommendations this year. But some of the projects don't have to be year-round master's levels. We had our GIS students map our trails, like go out with their phone and map the Oxford area trail system, which was great. We had an urban planning class conduct a naturalization plan for our community park. And right now we have 2 pilot plots going, one a pollinator garden and one a native grassland. And then another project we had is exploring a green business designation with our local business owners. We had students ask business owners, like, they kind of did the vibe check for us, right? Like, would you be interested in this? What incentives would make you more likely to be involved? So this is just a really small sample of the way our community has benefited from student projects and student learning opportunities, but I just wanted to share it as sort of a springboard for our Q&A. I believe
That
that's the next slide.
yeah.
Okay.
That was our last slide. So Cami, if you have questions that we can answer, we're happy to do that.
Great, thank you so much. I have a question actually before we jumpstart into the Q&A from registration. Can you talk a little bit more about who you worked with for, like, in terms of the department and the faculty of who you worked with for maybe specifically the GHG inventory, since that obviously, if it is is foundational for a climate action plan. I think it'd be really great to chat about what that relationship looked like. And was that just for the campus, or was that for the city and the campus?
It was just for the city, actually.
Okay.
So that was the client is the language that we use for the professional service projects. So it was the assistant city manager. Did I get her title correct, Reena?
Mhm.
Wonderful.
Yes, yeah.
So our assistant city manager was working with the professional service project team. The associate director of our Institute for Environment and Sustainability, like that is a keystone part of her job. She finds the clients, she, helps the students work through what their project is going to look like. We actually do learn a lot in that master's program about like setting the scope of a project, and understanding scope creep is a big thing that happens for anyone doing their first greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That's especially difficult to navigate as a student because you want to please the client, but you really have to know what skill set you have. So the city paid for a subscription to ICLEI, ICLEI, and that was the platform that we were entering data into on behalf of the city. So that was something that they had to fund in order for the project to be viable. And then we would just have client meetings with the assistant city manager and go, we need to know how much fuel the city is using. Who would be the points of contact for that? And it was something that she also helped us navigate in terms of, I'm completely making this up just for illustrative purposes, but like the city, the city street crew is going to give you their data, but the city police department is not going to be expecting a message from you. So I will send that on your behalf and do like an introduction so that you're not cold calling. So she did help us do some relationship management is maybe the best way of knowing, this person is going to receive a student email really well and be responsive. This person might need to understand that it is on behalf of the city manager's office that these students are asking for this information. So we really were relying on her expertise of points of contact. Reena, did I forget anything there?
No, I was just going to share a little bit more about the inventory. So the students provided a greenhouse gas inventory at both the local government operation scale and at the community scale. And then within the community scale, they did one with Miami and one without Miami. So that way, when the city went to make their mitigation targets, they chose like which inventory they wanted to utilize. And at the time chose the one without Miami, just because Miami had their own climate commitments and spheres of influence and things like that. The students did provide pretty much a full report of like exactly where their data source was. So that was helpful for me stepping into this role to repeat it. Now, just because of the data availability, we've changed some of those data sources, but it was a great resource. But again, anyone who does inventories here knows how much institutional knowledge you need to get it done. So we've decided to keep that as a staff like key project for staff rather than using students in the future. But they've provided such a firm foundation for us to go off of.
Great. And who did you say that you like, what was the title of the person that you worked with to get those students?
It was the associate director of our Institute for Environment and Sustainability.
Okay. So it was
She manages the master's program.
okay, so it was a faculty in the
In the
environmental.
academic side, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good bridge to kind of ask one of the questions about how do you essentially define what community means, or how far out do you extend what community means? And so maybe Reena, that'd be good for you, and if Olivia, you want to tap onto that.
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely project dependent. If this is an initiative that I'm doing using taxpayer dollars from the city of Oxford, it's pretty strict within the city of Oxford proper boundaries. But for some of the projects that are Miami University funded or more collaborative, that definitely stretches our definition. For example, the Campus Climate Action Corps program that is fully funded by Miami. We are working with a local nonprofit, Push People United for Self-Help, and their normal boundaries is our school district. So we're following their normal boundaries of what community is for those services. So it's a little bit project specific, but obviously we have pretty intertwined communities here. Even folks who work at Miami or work in our community live elsewhere. So the boundaries are fuzzy, but when we're spending tax dollars, we have to be a little bit more rigid, but we try to extend where we can.
Is that for the climate action plan for the inventory specifically, is it the city boundaries then?
Yes. Yes.
Great. And so we also had a question in the Q&A that is for you, Olivia. Someone asked, I'm curious if Olivia has considered some of ASHE's 3.0 criteria around community engagement, such as publishing guidelines for mutual community partnerships or community input and role in institutional governance. Also, perhaps considerations for how sustainability officers might contribute to an institution's application for Carnegie Community Engagement classification.
Thank you for that one. So that is something that we've been trying to look at now that we've transitioned to STARS 3.0, but admittedly, Miami's next report is due this May. So I am in active data collection right now. I've got STARS on the brain for sure. And we have looked at those criteria, and the campus compact is something that we intend to submit as part of our community partnerships for that new question or sort of newish section. But we have found that we do not have a framework for evaluating the success of those programs, as we were looking for new projects to achieve before our May submittal date. I will fully admit that we determined that we did not have time or capacity to develop a framework for evaluating those partnerships, but it is something that we are hoping to do once I get this first 3.0 submittal behind me, and we have a little more breathing room. So it wasn't something that we felt that we could get done in this short period, but it is something that we've considered and thought about in terms of these partnerships. I am not involved in our Carnegie Community Engagement classification. That is handled by, oh gosh, we call it the SEAL office here at Miami. So it's our student engagement and leadership is the easiest way that I can explain that office. But that is a great suggestion, and I'd be really interested to see. And if that's something that you have experience with, please reach out and let me know, because you would be doing a service to my colleagues who do submit that application.
Great, thanks, Olivia. We have a question from the registration that just asks, how can community build capacity for climate action? I think that's a big question, obviously, and there can be the campus community or the city community. But maybe we'll have you, Reena, take that and then hand it to Olivia.
Yeah, I think the short answer is like a willingness to provide a proof of concept. So for the campus, it's student projects that provide a greenhouse gas inventory, resilience assessment, things like that. But we've also had community members take the lead on having some zero waste events. So we have a city council member and a few members of our environmental commission who started attending our public events and collecting compost and recycling, and kind of got the ball rolling. And now we've been able to institutionalize that a little bit. There's of course some hiccups, but community can definitely spark and provide community climate action for our cities by just like, for lack of a better term, like taking the first step and being the inspiration.
I think that Reena's absolutely right that our community members have been the impetus for us to do work as a city, and for us at the university to do something like commit to carbon neutrality. I have a really hard time mentally separating to me, the community is the Miami community. Now that is certainly unique to our campus, and the fact that we're in a very small rural town that certainly would not have a full-time staff member, for instance, if our students hadn't done it as proof of concept. Reena also didn't mention this, but I think it's worth saying that Reena started at the City of Oxford as an intern during her master's program. We have Miami's master's program is extremely service oriented. So you have to do a 400-hour internship in your field to graduate. And Reena did her 400 hours at the City of Oxford. I did my 400 hours in this office under the previous director of sustainability. So when you think about shaping someone's career, I think we both were extremely fortunate to be able to, as a student, express our interest in this type of work. And I know, I was at another university before coming back to Miami in a professional role, and I wouldn't have gotten hired at Austin P if I didn't say I had worked in Miami's office for an entire year, before coming into that role. So placing interns has been an extremely successful way that we have demonstrated to entities that it would be worth investing staff dollars in having someone full time. And it, I would say, and I hope Reena would as well, that it was extremely worth our while, right? To spend those 400 hours in an office learning what it means to do this type of work. And that has been replicated. So Reena and I had the privilege last year to meet a student who just got hired at a neighboring city as their first sustainability coordinator. And they were a PSP client last year. She actually worked for them for her PSP. They got a staff line for a full-time person, and they hired someone who had just graduated here in December. So she'd been out of school a couple of weeks, and they said, please come work for us. So giving people like a taste of free labor has sometimes been a really good way to demonstrate what can be accomplished if you are able to have some capacity. People, anytime they are able, we've seen want more capacity, and that can be a good way to justify scrounging up some budget dollars. And I apologize, Cami, I've actually forgotten the original question. So if you think we missed anything, feel free to restate it and I can circle back.
No, you're okay. I think, yeah, well, I guess what I'm hearing is that using students kind of as a leverage point to show the demand, essentially, that this is something that is important for students in terms of their professional development, and then building upon that. The question was, and Reena, I'm happy to hand it to you as well, how can community build capacity for climate action? And so it can be the campus community or the city overall.
Yeah, I also think it's worth mentioning if you are in a community with a university, especially if that university has anything even tangential. It doesn't necessarily have to be environmental science. For instance, our biology department is also represented on both of Reena's boards. We have either current faculty or emeriti faculty from biology on both. And if you sat in on, a climate action steering committee meeting for the city of Oxford, almost everyone, now that I think about it, is either a current professor, an emeriti professor, or professors from other universities for some reason like to retire in Oxford. And so we even have some faculty who never worked at Miami, but when they retired from other universities, we have a very university feel. You go to the coffee shop and people will be, reading academic literature for fun and want to talk to you about that. Being such a college community, we have a lot of people whose research has to do with sustainability, environmental sciences, even if it's on the biological side. We have a lot of people who are doing sustainability research in our business school. And sometimes those are great allies to bring into the room to say, did you know that it is attractive for industry for you to be a sustainable community, for instance? And so really, we've been really fortunate, I would say, that people's personal passions or academic passions have come out in their personal lives. Like our Presbyterian church has an excellent creation care group that is doing very grassroots sustainability work, but all of the leadership of that creation care group are affiliated with the university in some way or another. So whether it's, you take your university passions to church, you take your university passions to city council, really, like, I think the environmental sentiment that comes from being on a college campus has bled out into our community in a positive way. But our Institute for the Environment and Sustainability predates the federal EPA. So we just have an extremely long history of it's a point of pride for the campus and the community that we've raised up multiple generations of environmental professionals. And then I would also say that our alumni network is something that we leverage really heavily. I know that if I call up the federal EPA office in Cincinnati or the state EPA office in Cincinnati, which are both 45 minutes from here, there's like a 50% chance that the person who answers the phone is a Miami alum. If I call the city of Cincinnati, which is our neighboring largest city, their director of sustainability is a Miami alum. So we're hard pressed to not find allies, is the point I'm trying to make.
Outside of institutions of higher ed, I also just wanted to emphasize the importance of having elected officials who prioritize and value sustainability, right? Like the student projects provided a foundation for my work, but ultimately my job, our carbon emissions goals, our climate action plan, those would not exist without the active involvement and support from our elected officials. So working with elected officials and we also had a lot of nonprofit partners engaged in the process. I didn't want to speak too much of that since we're more higher ed focused, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thanks, Reena, and how important maybe the local politics are in this conversation overall. Another question we have, I think we have about time for about two more, but how do you deal with negative stigma from the public about climate-focused topics? I don't know, Reena, if you want to jumpstart this one, and then we'll hand it to Olivia.
Yeah, so I will admit, because sustainability is such a prominent value of our community, I don't experience this as much as some other municipal employees. But we just focus on the things that impact folks, right? We want to lower your energy bills. We want to make sure we don't have blackouts in case of energy emergencies. We want to make sure your street and your backyard don't flood. And just focusing on those like very tangible, positive outcomes of sustainability programming. Is what we focus on there. But also we're in a community that like they want to hear us say climate change a little bit. So we're an odd bird. But I'll pass it to Olivia more on the campus side.
Yeah, I would say that as a university, we have a little bit more concern about pushback. Just, being a public institution in Ohio, the favor can ebb and flow for climate action, depending on state politics. But we've found it's very well received, especially in our state house, when we remind them of the energy efficiency and the dollar savings that come from energy efficiency. So I didn't go too much into Miami's emissions reductions. If anyone's interested, I can drop in the chat. We have a really great dashboard that we keep updated with some of that information. And the reason I refer to that, as opposed to you're welcome to go to SciMap and see our Second Nature dashboard. But we didn't sign until 2020, so that's our baseline year, and our climate action really predates that. Internally, we use 2008 as our baseline for a lot of our climate action work, and we've reduced our scope 1 and 2 emissions 50% since 2008, and we attribute over $100 million in savings and avoided cost through those energy efficiency updates. If you are a physical facilities energy efficiency geek like me, I'll give you just like a little bit of technical information. At our peak, our energy consumption was at 168 kBTU per gross square foot, and we are getting very close to 80 kBTU per gross square foot, which is very efficient. For facilities, especially, we're still operating some residence halls that were built in the 1820s. So to have students living in a building that was, when it came online, the students actually were issued an axe by the university and had to chop their own wood on campus to heat their dorm rooms. That's how old those dorms are. And they are currently heated and cooled using geothermal and have been since 2010. Geothermal specifically has been the focus of our work to date. We have pretty substantial geothermal already on campus. We're in active well drilling for 520 new wells to bring another section of the campus onto geothermal. But we have a long track record of reducing emissions. But if you, depending on the audience, asked me about our work, the framing may be different. I may talk about energy efficiency. I may talk about cost savings. So the language that we use differs depending on the audience. But I personally think that there's nothing wrong with, being concerned about the energy conservation element of it, because emissions go down when you use less energy. And depending on the audience, they're just going to have a different interest, and then the language that we use changes, but the work is getting done.
Great. And I think just maybe one to kind of round us out is, so in terms of engaging the different audiences, it sounds like, Olivia, you had folks from the city as part of your climate action planning process, and Reena, you had people from the campus as part of your climate action planning process. Who were those people? I know you said the city manager, or get creative with who that could be, but how did you find those people, and what was that engagement? Were they part of those committees that you were talking about, Olivia? And then what was happening in those committees? What were those conversations like? And then we'll close it out for the day.
I think that's a great way to end this conversation. So I was the representative, and my predecessor before me, so the director of sustainability, since that position did exist at Miami, we served on the city's climate action steering committee. The city did not have a full-time sustainability person when Miami began its climate action planning process. And so we just went to the city and tried to be as transparent as possible about how our work could impact the city. And I think that was a great starting place to say, here are changes we might want to make. Here are concerns that we have. So transit was a very big part of that. Also our energy procurement strategy, like who our energy provider was going to be, and those sorts of things were very important to that conversation. And so it also, I'm sure, depends on how your city is structured. So like we have a city manager, and so that office was like kind of the natural first place to go, just to have that conversation. And the assistant city manager at that time volunteered to serve on Miami's climate action steering committee. So she was attending monthly meetings on campus to help with the development of Miami's climate action plan. She was one of like our proofreaders as we were developing certain sections, to say like we have a goal of reducing student commuting emissions by 30%. The main way that we aim to do that is by increasing bus ridership. And then asking, so we also did actually have a representative from the county regional transit authority as well, and they were very instrumental in that section of the plan. And then of course, once they hired Reena, she was able to take over serving in that role. But there were a couple of faculty members who by choice served on both. And we found that was really helpful. So in both instances, we did a public call for volunteers, which we think is really important for people to feel that they have the option for their voice to be heard as part of this process. And then for the open houses that we both held, we held several open houses as we were developing the plan for community feedback. Reena held some open houses like at our senior center, for instance. Community members could just come out to the senior center and learn about the climate action plan that was in development. And a lot of the people who turned out to those events, in vice versa, were, you know, community members at mine, faculty coming to the senior center to talk about Reena's plan. So I will say that to some extent it was like self-selected.
I would echo that a lot of sustainability boards just kind of start with whoever's interested at first. But then as we went through our climate action process, planning process, at least on the city side, when there were specific topics that we knew were more like we needed additional input on, we went to either the respective like county or Ohio Department of Natural Resources, or reached out to our family support center. So some of these harder topics, especially with resilience, we didn't necessarily have someone at the table at every meeting, but me as staff then reached out on a topic by topic basis to get their input as needed. But yeah, a lot of it kind of just starts with whoever has a passion and running with it from there.
Great. Yeah, I think that's really important to kind of cross-pollinate, it sounds like, from the city to the campus, and having those folks kind of sit in both spaces. So, well, thank you both so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thanks, folks, for joining us. Like we said, we'll send out a recording of this as well as the slide deck either by the end of the week or early next week. So we hope you have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, y'all.